Hello again. In this video, we're finally going to get into how to edit your photos. So, like I said in the first video, generally most photographers either use Photoshop or Lightroom to edit. Now, I only use Photoshop. I know people that only use Lightroom. I know people that use both. So why should you use what and when and where? So generally, Lightroom is good for basic edits and organizing your photos. Photoshop is good for more intensive, heavier edits, so layer masking, clone stamp, content aware, that sort of thing. Now, the next question is, why do we edit? So here's a great example. Here is an unedited RAW shot. This is an edited JPEG. This is also why shooting in RAW is so important. With a JPEG, there's just not going to be enough information to do the edits that you really want. And we're going to get exactly into how to go from before and after later. But now just know that you're going to be spending just as much time, actually probably even more, time editing than taking your pictures. Before we really get too deep into Photoshop, I want to give you just a few basic beginner mistakes and mistakes that I've made in Photoshop. So the first thing with Photoshop is over editing, especially if you're talking saturation or color vibrancy. A little goes a long way, number one. Number two, using brightness and contrast instead of curves and levels to adjust the brightness or darkness in a photo. And I'll show you how to do that here in a few minutes. Number three, file type saving. You always want to keep your original RAW and PSD, that's your Photoshop document, files. Don't just keep your JPEGs, please. Finally, number four is not understanding aspect ratio or image size. And we'll talk about this later too. But for now, let's get into Photoshop.
All right, so let's get into Photoshop. The first screen that you'll see when you open a raw image in Photoshop is something that generally looks like this. This is the Adobe Camera Raw filter, also called ACR. And this is how you're going to make adjustments to your raw files. And we'll get more into how to make those edits later. So for now, let's just open our photo. So the first thing that you should know is that Photoshop works off of layers, and this is where a lot of new photographers really get kind of hung up and confused. So what does that mean? This means that you can make non-destructive edits on your files. Really, the best way to think about the layers, that's this area right down in here, is like a sandwich. So think of the bottom layer, which is what this is right here, like your bread. And then the next layer is, let's say, for example, your meat. And then the next layer would be your cheese. And then the next layer would be your condiments and so on and so forth. So just sticking with the sandwich analogy, let's say we put onions on our sandwich. Well, as Donkey says to Shrek in the movie, not everybody likes onions. So does that mean we have to start all over? No, we can just take those onions off. Now, same thing in Photoshop. If I make a mistake or the edit that I was trying to do didn't really work out, all I have to do is either hide that layer or delete it altogether. Again, non-destructive editing. So let me show you what that means. So here in our layer stack, we can see that the layer that we have right now is our background layer right here. Now that layer is locked with this little icon right here. So this is not a normal layer. So to change that, we're going to double click on it, and I'm going to hit OK. Then to add a new layer, I'm going to click right here and see how I now see layer 1. And so I can shut these layers on or off. So let's just shut this layer off just for showing purposes. Now all I have is my blank layer 1. There's nothing on it. So let's just put something on there that just to show you. So let's just do something like this. And let's make that bigger so we can see. And we'll hit OK. So there's my layer example. So if I want to work on just this layer, I want to make sure that it's selected, which it is right now. But let's say I want to hide that layer. So in that case, I would turn my bottom layer back on. And now we obviously have both layers, but let's shut this off. So we're going to click on the eyeball, and now it's gone. but it's not actually deleted. It's just hidden. So I can easily turn that layer on and off however I want. And if I want to delete it, I would just click that little trash can icon right there. All right, so the next thing that you're going to want to do is crop. And almost always you're going to be cropping your photos. And we'll get more into detail about aspect ratio and cropping in a later video. But to crop, you're going to want to click on this icon right here, and then I can set whatever aspect ratio I want. So if I want this to be 16:9, which is obviously more of a widescreen, and then I can, drag this in, move this around, do whatever I want with it. Or if I want this to be more of a 4:5, which is kind of more for Instagram or sometimes even Facebook, I can, change the orientation of that. I can move this around and do whatever I want with it. All right. So the third thing is that you're going to want to probably adjust is your image brightness. But one of the biggest mistakes that new photographers make is that they use brightness and contrast. So right here under image, adjustments, brightness and contrast. Don't do this. Why? This will apply changes to my image globally and not only adjust certain areas of my photo. So let me show you what I mean. So let's just crank up the brightness. You see how it's affecting the whole photo? We don't want that. So what do? Instead, we want to use curves, which is under image, adjustments, curves, or levels. This will allow us to only affect certain areas of our histogram. Now, what the heck is that? This is a graph, which is right here, that shows us where our light areas and our dark areas in our image are. Now, the far part to the left is our black area, and the far part to the right is white. Now, if my histogram leaned all the way to the left, let's say this information was all the way over here, it'd be too dark and underexposed. If my histogram leaned more to the right, which in this case it is, it would be way too light and overexposed, which as you can see, it is a little overexposed. Now generally, we want our histogram to have peaks and valleys in it, to where all of the data is available, with most of the data in the center. So if we're going to do that, we can adjust that, again, either with levels or with the histogram. To do it with levels, I would just move these sliders up and down, and you can see it's only adjusting certain areas in my image. It's not making global adjustments throughout the photo. That's what we want to do. Another mistake that new photographers make is overdoing vibrancy and saturation. So that's going to be image, adjustments, vibrance, and hue and saturation. So let's just bring up vibrance, and I'll show you. If I bring up vibrance just a little bit, you can see those colors are getting more rich and saturated. But please, don't overdo this. The big thing in Photoshop is that a little goes a long way. Please remember that. Alright, so just for talking purposes, let's just say I've done all of my edits and I now want to save my image and post this image somewhere on, say, Facebook. But there's really only a small handful of programs beyond Photoshop and Lightroom that can read camera raw. That's files that end in .cr2 for Canon and .nef for Nikon. Now, not only can the average user not read these files, they're also huge. The default file format for Photoshop is Photoshop Document, or PSD. That's what you want to be saving your files as when you're working in Photoshop. So obviously we want to say save, and you can see right here it's saving as PSD. That's what we want. Now, after I've saved to a PSD and all my edits are done, then I can export to a file type that people can read, say a PNG or a JPEG. But even if I save as a JPEG now, my file is still going to be really, really large, and it's not going to be optimized for viewing on the web or on a phone. I'm simply going to be giving the web way too much data, and my photo won't look good. So how do I do that? So I'm going to say File, and then I'm going to say Export, and then I want to say Export As. And then this screen right here is going to pop up. Now, as you can see, 3.7 megabytes. That's really, really big. And if I look at my image size, 5,000 by 3,000, that's huge. Generally, if I'm posting things on, say, Facebook or Instagram, I really want my photo no bigger than about maybe 1500 or maybe even 2000 pixels on the long edge. So I'm going to delete that out, and let's just, for showing purposes here, let's just type 1500, and then I'm going to click anywhere outside the box for Photoshop to scale my image proportionally, and that's what we want. And then I can set my image size. As you can see here, it's 168 kilobytes. So that's pretty small. So let's actually make that a little bit bigger. Let's put that at 7. 656 kilobytes. That's much better. And then I would say export to save this as a JPEG. And then I can post it on Facebook. Now, remember, you always want to keep your original RAW files and your PSD files with your edits. Please do not delete either one of those. Please don't just keep your JPEGs. You will regret it. Just trust me on this one. All right. In our next video, we're going to show you how to crop, when, why, and how. So please, stay tuned.